J'ouvre maintenant.
I would like now to call the meeting to order. And welcome to meeting number 44 of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs.
Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Monday, October 3, 2022, the committee undertake its study on the experience of women veterans. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se
Today's meeting is conducted in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order adopted on Thursday, June the 23rd. Members may participate in person or through the Zoom app. To ensure the meeting runs smoothly, I'd like to pass along a few instructions. Before you speak, please wait for me to call your name. If you're participating in a video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. Otherwise, please mute yourself when not speaking. As to interpretation, for those on Zoom, I think you know how to do it, to choose the language of your choice, and I would remind all observers, witnesses, MPs should address their questions to the chair. And pursuant to our routine motion regarding connection tests, I wish to inform the committee that the witnesses have completed the required connection tests prior to the meeting.
Come our witnesses. I would like to provide this trigger warning. We will be discussing experiences related to mental health. This may be triggering to viewers, members, or staff with similar experiences. If you feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk. Je voudrais aussi dire aux membres du
I would also like to inform the committee that we are welcoming today our analyst, Kelly Schatt. And I would also like to greet our witnesses. As we're starting our experience of women veterans, we are very pleased to invite you to this first session.
I would like to welcome Colonel Retired Nishika Jardine, Veterans Ombud, Dwayne Shippers, Deputy Veterans Ombud, and Dr. Laura Kelly, Director, Strategic Review and Analysis Directorate. Donc, excusez-moi, Madame.
So, Ms. Jardine, you have 5 minutes to present your opening statement, and I'll give you a little sign when your time has expired or a 1-minute warning. The floor is yours, so you have 5 minutes, please. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to address you on the subject of experience of women veterans. I understand that this is the first time that this committee has dedicated a series of meetings solely focused on women veterans. As a woman veteran myself, I'm honored that you've chosen me to lead off this historic undertaking.
Women have had access to every occupation and trade of the Canadian Armed Forces since 1989, when the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal in Brown versus Canadian Armed Forces disagreed with the argument that women would negatively affect the operational effectiveness of its combat arms. However, since its inception, the CAF is and has been a predominantly male institution. Its approach to implementing gender integration and equal opportunity was to simply absorb women into its ranks by ignoring their differences as much as possible. It seemed to make sense, and for the most part, we service women wanted only to be treated the same as everyone else. Dans les FAC,
in the Canadian Armed Forces, policies on pay, benefits, promotion criteria, and performance requirements are applied equally to everyone. Even the physical fitness requirements evolved to a single common standard for all. But women and men are different, and the effects of military service on women differ from the effects of service on men.
My office published in the Journal of Military, Veteran and Family Health a scoping literature review on women veterans of the Canadian Armed Forces and Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In this review of academic literature and government documents, we focused on the experiences of Canadian women veterans as a whole, rather than on a single issue. I would strongly recommend the scoping review to the committee, as it provides a comprehensive summary of the current research findings on the experience of Canadian women veterans. There is evidence that military service impacts women differently in terms of their physical health, their mental health, their financial security, and in their transition from military to veteran, from civilian service life to civilian life. While much less is known about women members and veterans of the RCMP, there is no doubt in my mind that this group of women with unique service to Canada deserves equal attention. Ce qui manque dans la...
What is missing from the research is the answer to why there are such significant differences between the experiences as lived by women than men. And I would also encourage researchers to study this in particular in order to grasp the particular unique problems that they may face. More importantly still, women veterans must be understood as a distinct group. While some women veterans are also spouses or widows or identify with other equity-deserving groups, just as some men veterans, they are in fact a unique population with unique needs because of their gender or sex. For example, during our VAC client survey provided by the department with a way to gauge satisfaction with the programs and services. However, the reports didn't distinguish among the female or women respondents. Rather, spouses, widows, and women were lumped all together. I suggest that this is unacceptable today. VAC must do a better job of understanding and being seen to understand the needs of women veterans.
My office has consistently recommended that VAC publish the gender-based plus analyses that are required to inform all departmental activities. GBA Plus, when done correctly, will allow VAC to better understand how its policies may have differential impacts on not only women veterans, but all equity-deserving groups who seek access to the benefits and programs that Parliament has created for all of Canada's veterans. I would also recommend proactive investment in the research questions that still remain all these many years since women have been serving in our Canadian Armed Forces and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. We will not see equitable outcomes for women veterans and all equity-deserving veterans until this is prioritized both in terms of resources and data collection. In summary, I would say this. While we just wanted to be one of the guys when I first started my military career in 1982, today we know that the differences and the many intersectional factors of our individual identities are key to understanding and meeting the unique needs of Canada's women veterans. Oh my goodness. I read this through without doing this before. I cannot thank you enough for making this study a priority, and I look forward to your recommendations. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jardine, and for your opening remarks. And now we're going to start with the round of questions. But first of all, I'd like to remind all members that to address the question to me, but to indicate also to who the question is, et aussi de bien vouloir gérer.
And please manage your time very vigilantly so that there's enough time for the answers. So, this being said, we're going to begin a round of 6 minutes. Mr. Charles can begin for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Very much for being here, Colonel Jardine, and thank you, first of all, for your service to our country, both your time in the forces and, of course, the service that you provide now as the Ombud. And I think what an appropriate way to start this very important study with yourself here as someone who served and who continues to serve veterans to this very day. And, you know, we saw how important this is to you in the emotion that you showed as you gave your testimony, and I think that's great to see, and thank you for that. Can I start off with a question for you about a letter that you recently released that you had sent to the minister about the clawback of pensions of those who received a settlement in the Merlo-Davidson case. Can you, for those who aren't aware of the situation, can I maybe ask you to briefly summarize that situation, the case, and what the situation is, and tell us why you're so concerned about that?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
The Merlo-David settlement was for women of the RCMP who had been victims or had experienced sexual misconduct during the course of their service. The settlement had 6 levels of claim, if you will. What we found, and we had received complaints from RCMP women veterans who were getting their pensions, their disability pensions, part of it clawed back based on the settlement monies that they had received. We did a review of this matter, and what we found is that in our estimation, those who had received a level 1 or level 2 settlement amount and who had also put in for a disability pension, those 2 things were not the same. And there is, we all understand that government cannot and must not compensate people for the same thing twice. And we understand that. But what we found is that level 1 and level 2 were not the same. They were not being compensated for the same thing if they'd put in for a disability pension, say for PTSD. For levels 3 to level 6, we saw there may have been some overlap. What we recommended, or the recommendation we made to the minister, were that anyone who was receiving a level 1 or level 2 compensation and had also a disability pension, that anything that had been clawed back from them should be reimbursed to them fully. And that for the level 3 to 6, that the minister should publish exactly how they determined what amount of clawback was being taken from their pensions based on the settlement amount. And that is the letter that I put into the minister.
Have you had a response to that letter? What was the response? Did you find it satisfactory if there was one?
Yes, I did receive a response from the minister. And what I understand is that the department is looking into the matter and is reaching out to the women that they have found who are in that situation. And they're reaching out to them to clarify where they're at. I don't know how else to say it better than that.
So I mean, how I would read that is that that's to kind of do damage control. Just to me, if you're going to fix the situation, wouldn't you just come out and say it? Maybe I'm misreading that. Tell me what your thoughts are on that. Is that kind of the read you have on it?
No, if we all understand that public servants, that our departments, they must do due diligence. And what we understand is that the women that they have found in their file search had put in their statements that they had in fact been compensated and that it was the same compensation. But they did not know that. They didn't know what they were. They were very honest. And so the department, needs to go back to these women and speak to them about what it was that they put there.
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, if I can move on to, I often hear from veterans who've had a negative experience with Veterans Affairs. That's obviously a huge part of what you do. And they often express reservations about kind of coming forward, including to yourself, because they're concerned about repercussions they might have from Veterans Affairs. Will they lose access to benefits or services that they rely on if they speak out or if they say something? And I wonder if you could just help to tell us a little bit so veterans can hear from you today. What happens when a veteran comes to you with a complaint about VAC? What can you do and what do you do to ensure that they are protected from retaliation by Veterans Affairs and that they're able to maintain their anonymity if they choose to?
Thank you for the question. First of all, this is what I say at every town hall that I go to. The people at Veterans Affairs care about what they do. I will not believe that anyone would be retaliatory. To me, that is, I know it may feel that way to some veterans, but it is not the case. In my heart, I believe that. I believe that they care deeply about the work that they do. In terms of confidentiality, when a veteran or their family or whoever is a client of the department comes to our office, we ask for their consent in order to be able to look into their complaint. With their consent, we will look into their file because we have access to that. If we find that there has been unfairness, then we need to go to the department to seek a resolution for that. In order to seek that resolution, we will need to say who they are in order to seek that resolution. And in many of the cases, we're able to achieve that resolution.
Thank you, Colonel Retired Jardine. And now I'd like to invite Mrs. Richie Valdez for 6 minutes, please. Please go ahead.
Thank you to the witnesses that have joined to kick off this very, very important study. And thank you to you who have served this country and to those who continue to support our veterans. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll direct my questions to Colonel Jardine. I read in an article that most of the support systems that have been designed around men. In an article, it says that there are gaps in knowledge, and because of this, it can lead to increased rates of injury and illness and a decrease in the well-being of women veterans. I would like to get your input on this.
The manner in which we serve in the Canadian Forces or the RCMP, it's demanding service. And as I mentioned in my remarks, the way that women were integrated was to just bring them in and treat them like one of the guys. What we understand today is that by doing that, there have been harms. Women suffer greater injury, musculoskeletal, mental health, physical health. Their service, the conditions of service affect them differently than they do men. In Veterans Affairs, the Table of Disabilities was originally designed for men. For example, one of the studies that we did just recently, we published a report on the sex-based bias that we found in just one tiny portion of that Table of Disabilities in the process for evaluating sexual dysfunction. In the questionnaire that goes to the doctor, on that questionnaire, for example, it asks specifically, is there sexual dysfunction if the person sitting in front of the doctor is a man? For women, the similar question is not there. And so it results in, PTSD, psychiatric, mental health can have adverse impacts on a woman's sexual health as well. But it was invisible, and the Table of Disability was silent on that. So we found this one sex-based bias in this one tiny portion of the programs and benefits offered to women, to all veterans and to women veterans. And so we have asked the department to take a close look at everything in the Table of Disabilities and examine it for where there might be sex-based bias or things that are missing.
Thank you. So I'm just going to be cautious about how I ask the next question because it's more sensitive. So studies have shown a link between combat exposure and PTSD. Well, what I want to hear is if there's any nuances as far as exposure that affect women veterans' mental health, and any nuances there that are unique to women veterans.
Thank you for the question. I don't have the answer to that. I think this is a big part of the gap in the research. I'm going to ask my colleague, Dr. Kelly, if there was anything in our scoping review that she might be able to point to.
Thank you. So I can't speak specifically to combat arms, but I can say generally speaking, what we found in terms of mental health is that compared to men veterans, women veterans have higher rates of depression and are more likely to have panic disorder, a social phobia, generalized anxiety disorder, or PTSD. And compared to women in the Canadian general population, they are more likely to have PTSD.
Thank you. And so in previous testimony in this committee, we've heard a lot from various veterans that it's tough to transition into normal life or post-life after serving. So you've listed a whole bunch of different stress, anxieties that someone would go through. So could you add some colors to then what would it be like then to transition to normal life?
When you're in the military, I'll speak for the military because that's my service. It's your whole life. You are. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's an every minute of every day career. It's a life that you've chosen, and it is. It's all encompassing. The day you walk out the door, like I still have trouble with it. The day that I left the Canadian Forces, I didn't even realize until the night before that was it. I was never going to post it again. Didn't have another job to go to. And you go in and you sign the piece of paper and you leave your ID card on the table. And then you walk out the door. And for me, it was devastating. Because I didn't know who I was if I wasn't wearing a uniform. And I've heard that from other veterans, that they just don't know who they are when they take off the uniform. I drove directly to Service Ontario and got veterans plates on my car. It was hugely, hugely important to me.
I just want to say thank you for your service. Yeah. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Et maintenant, j'aimerais donc passer la...
And now, for the next 6 minutes, the second Vice President of the company, Mr. Luc Desilets. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for my colleagues for being here in number. And thank you, of course, to our invited guests. Madam, I am very, very pleased to see you again. You've fulfilled your function as ombuds with great brio, and I have a lot of respect for what you do and who you are. I'd like to pick up and repeat a few of the... In the Canadian Forces, it's an institution which is mainly masculine in character. And the integration of women and the equality of opportunities is hindered simply by the absorption of women into the ranks without really recognizing the differences. Women veterans want to be treated equally as men, members of the force. We know that the differences are intersectional and are inherent part of our identity, and we have to understand what that is in order to understand the specifics of our situation. Now, for me, there seems to be quite a dichotomy here. We have the need and the wish to have an egalitarian approach and practice in the forces, and at the same time, we also want to recognize the singularity, the uniqueness of being a woman. So how can we reconcile these two wants? How can we find a balance, if you will? Well, I've been out of the Canadian Forces for 4 years now, and we know full well that there are quite a few changes going on, a change in the culture of the institution, which are being realized, in fact. I can only speak of what's perhaps going on within the Canadian Forces. When I say we want to be treated like one of the guys, that was the mentality when I joined in '82, and I fully understood that. But that's 40 years ago, and there has been change. There has been significant change. I am not quite aware, I'm not following closely what's going on, the progress, the evolution, if you will. I deal with mainly and only with veterans. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm really pleased to see your committee examine the experience of women veterans. Well, do you have the impression, I know you don't want to speak too much about what's going on now because you're not there, but for women in the forces, actively in the forces today, has there been a change in the behavior, the comportment, the mentality, the attitude within the forces. Well, precisely, sir. This is why we need research in that field, because we really don't have a full picture here. There's various anecdotal evidence on the physical harms and the physical consequences or sequela, and on mental health as well. And there are differences. But why should there be differences? Why would service affect women differently? We're just becoming to recognize and acknowledge that there is a difference. The research that has been done comes through the program of, we shine a light on the thing. And I hope that research will continue and that some researchers will be asking that same question. Well, I was quite surprised to learn in your article, Women Determined, etc., to what point the impact was on women members and women veterans. And this is, of course, we are scheduling about 20 meetings on this very subject, representation in key positions. You spoke of traumatism, sexual aggression, resulting perhaps in a higher rate of almost every ill, including homelessness. The distinct result on women vis-à-vis men can be judged from the nature of the complaints that you received. Well, no, in fact, we don't see much difference. The complaints that we receive, and one has to understand that there are perhaps 160, 175,000 potential clients at VAC, and we get 2,000 complaints a year. So it's a very minor, but not insignificant, number of complaints. The numbers are about the same for men and women, and they're mostly they complain about the same things. It takes a long time to get their disability pensions and benefits for treatment and therapies, for example, and any other program offered by VAC. So we can't really point out and identify and say, no, this one is only a woman's issue. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Your time has expired.
Rachel Blenny for 6 minutes, please, to ask questions.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses here today for this study. I know that I've been wanting this study to happen for a long time, and I'm very excited and very thrilled that the support of the committee, we got it to as many meetings as we have. I know how important this issue is. So my first question is going to come to you, Colonel Jardine. First of all, I just want to say how much I appreciate the strength in which you have dealt with this issue today in front of us. And I also want to just thank you so much for the work that you've done on the Merlo-Davidson case. A lot of these women have reached out to my office and shared stories that I'm still finding space to hold in my spirit. And I just want to thank you for doing that work. It's so important to validate those voices and make sure that they're heard in the way that you have. And very pleased to hear that VAC sounds like they'll be honoring it and looking forward for when that happens. One of the reasons I wanted to study women veterans is because I am concerned about the fact that the attraction strategy on the military side continues to not be very strong. And I fully believe that there's a cycle here that we need to look at in terms of how women are doing in the military and how they're doing after their service as their veterans. And you spoke in your testimony today about the effects of military service on women differ from the effects of service on men. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about, in the work that you've done and in the service that you have provided, where do you see some of those differences and what things should we be looking for as we do this study?
Absolutely. In the scoping review that we did, we went into a fair bit of detail. So it's quite academic. I think if there is time, I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Kelly, to just go over some of those, and maybe it'll give you a sense of what some of the things that we have found evidence for.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the question. So the research is limited. That's one of the main findings in the report, but it did still have quite a few findings. So, for example, we know that women veterans are 2 to 3 times more likely to have medically released, and they have higher rates of certain physical and mental health conditions compared to men veterans. They also report a more difficult transition to civilian life. One study found that women veterans' incomes declined by 17 to 23% in the first 3 years post-release, whereas men's only decreased by less than 1%. Compared to women in the Canadian general population, women veterans have higher rates of certain physical and mental health conditions. Most concerning is that they have an 80 to 90% higher risk of dying by suicide.
I mean, that's quite devastating. And I think, you know, I really appreciated the opening of the statement that you brought forward through the chair, of course, because the fact is that there's different realities. And I've heard stories from veterans, for example, that talk about having PTSD and having medication that they're taking that has prevented their ability later on to have strong reproductive health. And I've also heard from veterans, women veterans who've come forward and said that often when they're dealing with VAC, they hear things like, well, prove that this health issue you have now is related to your service. And I think one of the biggest challenges is that we don't see the sort of recognition of the different bodies. But also, I'm just curious if you could comment on this. There doesn't seem to be a process when you come into the system as women that your body is checked out so that you have a frame of reference when you get to the other side. Because it feels like there's a really big block there in terms of what I've heard from women veterans. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
That is a great question. I will say I hadn't thought about that in terms of you're talking about your medical when you join the Canadian Forces. I certainly don't remember anything about reproductive health in my medical, but that was 40 years ago, and I can't speak about what it is today. In terms of what VAC is doing, when I first took up this job, I remember getting a briefing from Veterans Affairs, and they told us that they are reviewing the Table of Disabilities. And this is the key document that captures all of the possible things that could be linked to service. And that's the key. But I have not seen the updated table as yet, and I haven't had any kind of update on it.
Well, thank you so much for that. This is a really hard, challenging study, and I think part of it, and you've mentioned it, is that there isn't a lot of research or data collected, so it's really hard for us to know. And I've done a little bit of a review of what's been done in our neighbors to the south, the United States. There's a lot more information. I think we could learn from them for sure. But I'm just wondering, when we look at that relationship, the intersection between VAC and D&D, do you have any ideas about what needs to change so that these departments work better to serve women, service members, and then women veterans?
And I know that there is a CAF-VAC joint steering committee. I am not certain what the scope of their mandate is and what they look at, but that would be a great question for them. What they're doing jointly. I can't remember the second part of your question. I'm sorry.
Just the intersection between the two. Like I said earlier, one of the things that concerns me is our attraction strategy for women on the military side is not going up. We keep setting goals. We're not getting anywhere near that. And then we hear that women aren't doing well on the other side. So just where's the intersection?
In 15 seconds, please, Ms. Colonel Jardine.
I'll be honest with you, Mr. Chair, I'm not certain.
Thank you. Et là, nous allons passer au deuxième tour.
We'll start our second round, and I would invite Mr. Fraser Tolmie for 5 minutes.
I'd like to thank our panelists for being here, and I'd like to again recognize Colonel Jardine and just thank you for your service. I appreciated your the last time that you were here in our meeting and going over a number of issues that we've been dealing with in this in this committee. I have a couple questions, and first I would maybe ask Dr. Kelly. One of the things that I've recently, when I've met with veterans, and they've been facing challenges trying to get care and access from Veterans Affairs, that when they release from the military, their medical report may say that they're fine. But later on, they start experiencing things like tinnitus, bad hips, bad backs, and there seems to be a delayed health issues. Have you seen that? And could you please maybe just give me a little bit of input if you have seen that?
I wonder if I could perhaps take that. I've been out out across the country actually for the past several weeks, and that is exactly what we hear. Is that particularly with people who get out of the military on what I like to call the 30-day plan, I'm out of here, and in 30 days they're out, and they're just leaving the forces, and then it's years later where they realize that, oh, my knees are bad. And, that's probably related to the hundreds of times I jumped off the back of an MLVW or whatever it was. And then they look to put in their claims, and there may not be in their service health records, there may not have been a record by the military doctors of what they had been experiencing while they were in service. And that is a challenge. When I go out and about, I tell these sort of older veterans, or my age kind of thing, if you're going to put in a claim today, get help getting it done. It's not evident from the disability claim form what is required to go in there. The veteran services officers at the Legions are trained to do this, and they're a resource that they can use, or they can ask Veterans Affairs Canada themselves for assistance in getting those done, because it is difficult to make that link to service when it's years down the road.
Yes, and that's what I've been hearing, is that a lot of the rejection in these files are based on the fact of their exit from the military where there was no health issues. So my next question would be, and I appreciated your testimony very early on there, and we talk about the identity that we have becomes our job and who we are. And so, the very early 80s, females are integrated into a predominantly male environment, and there's no kind of clear path. And so what I'm kind of alluding to here is there any other nations that you've seen or studied that have faced the same challenges in your experience with this?
There are a lot of countries in the world who have women in their Canadian forces, in their armed forces, pardon me. Whether all occupations are open to women differs across the world. In terms of how they deal with their women veterans, the United States, they have a completely different system. They provide health care directly to their veterans. So their understanding of both men veterans and women veterans and their health, physical, mental health, is far greater than our understanding. And I believe that we have looked to the South for information. Perhaps, Dr. Kelly, you could speak to what we found in our scoping review.
Sorry, and just with that, would you say that it's a better system down there than what we have up here?
Mr. Chair, I would say it's a different system.
Okay, so thank you. The scoping review just looked at veterans of the Canadian Armed Forces and RCMP. But we did do another literature review, and just one finding relates to injuries of the pelvic region, such as pelvic prolapse and pelvic floor muscle dysfunction. And so there were two studies out of the United States and one study out of Australia that found that backpack loads and certain training operations did in fact lead to greater incidences.
Dr. Kelly, I'm sorry, I have to stop you here. And
You can give me another minute or so.
Yes. But you have some colleagues who would like to ask questions. So I'd like to invite Mr. Miao for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses joining us today for this very important study. Maybe Dr. Kelly, if you want to finish off your answers to the last response, maybe we can do that first.
Actually, that was everything. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Well, thank you so much, and Colonel Jardine, really thank you for all the years of service that you have contributed and sacrificed. And through the chair, I would like to, I know earlier you shared with us some of your personal experience of transitioning out of the Canadian Armed Forces. Would you be able to share a little bit more on if there was any part of the process that you found it more difficult for you than it was to some of your peers?
I think thank you very much for that question. In our scoping review, we found that women veterans earn less than their male counterparts post-release. And I remember General Natinchuk speaking about purpose. If you don't know what you're going to do when you leave the Canadian Forces, it is very difficult to move forward. And that contributes to a sense of a lack of identity. It affects your self-confidence. If I could share a bit of my own personal experience, I left the Canadian Forces after 37 years. And I was a senior officer at the Staff College. And I on the day I left, on this side of the door, I was the deputy commandant of the Staff College in charge of all the people and the money that ran that institution. In the space of one heartbeat, I walked through the door and I was an old lady with a box. And it's profound. And I know it's not just the military. I mean, many other professions, people go through the same thing. But I think if we could do transition, and I know that the Canadian Forces is working hard to change the way that people go through that transition and helping them to understand that they need to have a purpose. So when you get up in the morning the very next day, or maybe a week later, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And that is key to mental health, to moving forward, to financial security, and all of those things are interrelated. And to me, purpose is huge.
And do you feel you're well supported after you've been released and trying to look for a career of your own, something that gives you the sense of meaningfulness of, starting a new civilian life?
So what I know, and I would encourage you to speak to the Canadian Forces Transition Group about how they do transition today. It's changed a great deal just in the past 4 years. And whether they do anything specific for women as they do for men, I think that would be a great question for them.
And I know through your research in the past, you found evidence that in military, the service impact women very differently. What are the big differences or even the small differences that it may be overlooked that we should know about?
Absolutely. Again, I will invite my colleague, Dr. Kelly, to share with you some of the things that we found in the scoping review. This document the scoping review that we did captures all of the research that we were able to find we published in October 2021. Perhaps, Dr. Kelly, you could add more to what you've already said.
Sure, thank you. I'd just like to acknowledge as well that the scoping review was authored by Megan Poole, an analyst at the OVO. So I'll try to get through as much as I can. So compared to men veterans, women veterans are more likely to report chronic illness, respiratory conditions, and gastrointestinal disorders. They're 2 times more likely to have an acute injury from training. They are at a 2 times higher risk of central nervous system conditions. They have higher rates of depression and are more likely to have a panic disorder, a social phobia, generalized anxiety disorder, or PTSD. They are 10% more likely to have served less than 20 years, and therefore they are more likely to have lower pension amounts. And compared to women in the Canadian general population, they have higher rates of arthritis, back problems, migraines, hearing problems, cancer, and PTSD.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly, and thank you, Mr. Miao. Et maintenant, nous allons donc passer à 2 courtes.
And now we're going to go to 2 short interventions.
This screen in the front is not working. It's flashing on and off. It was fine, and I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. So we're going to look at it with our technicians. So, Monsieur Desilets.
Mr. Desilets, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Madam Jardine, you referred, and I'm referring to one of your other articles, that there was very little research on the experiences of women veterans, including the RCMP in the case of this article. We can only resolve a problem unless we can't resolve this situation unless we can quantify the nature and scope of the issue. Now, I feel that there must be a branch or a directorate that is working on that in your position now. Are there issues? Is there a chair for research on women veteran issues, for example? Specific interest in that as a narrow focus. Well, I'm not familiar with all the research that's occurring in Canada or the researchers, but I met one, Dr. Maya Eichler, Mount St. Vincent University. We met her, in fact, last week. And Dr. Norris, who is specialist with the military family as a unit, and Dr. Habibi, who is very concerned with child soldiers. Dr. Eichler also, but there are others who are specializing in one aspect or another. Dr. Kelly, perhaps you're more familiar with that cohort.
Sans prendre trop de temps là-dessus.
Well, without spending too much time on that, could you provide us a list in writing later, and perhaps we'd invite them as witnesses? It could be quite interesting and perhaps very productive. In 1989, we had Brown versus veterans. I know it goes back quite a ways, but nonetheless, I was quite struck when I read this decision. It was rejected. The request was rejected. But the point was, women would be a hindrance to the operational efficiency in the combat of arms. Now, I read this today, and I'm not, Mr. Desilets, I'm afraid that your time, I'd love to let you carry on, but I'd like to ask Colonel Jardine if she could have a very precise, concise answer. Colonel? It happened in 1989. Since then, women have access to all positions and functions in the Canadian Forces. Thank you very much, Madame Jardine. Now, Rachel Blaney, you have 2.5 minutes.
Through the chair, as always, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. One is, I see in the report that you said to us today is that one of the things that was said is that your office is consistently recommending that VAC publish the gender-based plus analysis, and I would just like to hear about what that recommendation is about and what your concerns are. I think it should be public as well, but it would be helpful. And then the second part, you talked about the satisfaction surveys, lumping together spouses, widows, and women veterans. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on what concerns you about that process in VAC.
So the GBA Plus analysis, we believe they do it. We just don't know how well it's done. If they published it, we could look at it. It would be transparent. And women veterans could see that. And I think it would go a long way to improving their sense of confidence that the department is looking to meet their needs. It's about perception as well. And that is why we consistently ask for those analyses to be published. The second part of your question was with respect to that survey, for example. When I joined the Canadian Forces, I remember my first posting, and it was to CFB Gagetown. I was a young officer, and my boss said, "Nishka, you need to go join the women's, the Officers' Wives Club." And I went there, and I thought, I have nothing in common with these women. They are the wives of the people that I work with. I'm a peer of their husband. I never went back. I can't believe that today, 40 years later, the survey that VAC does for their clients takes answers, because they survey the families of veterans, that they will group the answers from all the women. If you're a spouse or a widow or you're a woman veteran, you just get lumped together. And to me, that's not right. Because we are not we may be spouses, we may be widows, but we are women veterans, and our voice needs to be heard as a distinct group.
Well, and I think it's harder to measure the challenges if you don't hear the distinct voice. Thank you.
Ms. Blenay, écoutez, le temps passe trop vite.
I'm afraid time flies much too quickly. That's unfortunately the only time we have left now for this panel. So, Colonel Jardine, I would also like to thank you very much for your 37 years of service. You made that decision 40 years ago, and the fact that the members of the committee have decided to put in a trigger warning, I think, was quite appropriate, because we've heard a lot of things during your testimony, and we were geared up to hear those things. So now, from the Office of the Veterans, we have Nishika Jardine, Ombuds for the Women Veterans, Duane Shippers, Deputy Veteran Ombud, and Dr. Laurie Kelly, Director, Strategic Review and Analysis Directorate. We're going to suspend once we have thoroughly thanked our witnesses, and thank you very much for your contribution to this report.
We can now proceed with the second panel of witnesses. A quick reminder to our witnesses that before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. And if you are on the video conference, please click the microphone icon to unmute yourself. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. So, members of the committee, as you know, maybe that we're going to have a vote, but j'aimerais vous présenter.
But nonetheless, you have received a copy of the budget In regards to the contract for rehabilitation, unless we had more witnesses than we had forecast, we will have to renew or reapprove, if you will. We've had to have two supplementary meetings. So are there any questions on the part of the committee as to this further budget request that we have sent you?
To be honest with you.
Yeah.
Specifically today, okay. I guess I haven't had a chance to see it yet, so maybe I can ask Weeder first.
Yes, yes. And the reason why is just because we have a few meetings on the rehab contract, and we have meals on the Thursday. So we have 1,600 budget to, additional budget to adopt. So I'd like to know if there is any discussion about that, or would you like, est-ce qu'il plaît au comité?
Does it please the committee to adopt this supplementary budget? Any objections at all? Well, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, we have approved this request for more budget.
Our witnesses, both of them are on Zoom. From the Department of Veterans Affairs, we have by video conference Nathan Svensson, Director, Research, and we have Lisa Garland-Bird, Senior Researcher. So, Mr. Svensson, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and after that, we'll go to questions from members of the committee. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear as a witness, and thank you for undertaking this important study. I'm here in Charlottetown with my colleague, Dr. Lisa Garland-Baird, who has a PhD in nursing and is a senior researcher, as mentioned, at Veterans Affairs, and she's working to advance research on women veterans. I want to start by acknowledging that unlike Colonel Jardine, I'm not a woman and have no military service, yet I'm speaking to the committee about the experience of women veterans. While I can speak about research that has been done or is underway on this topic, there is a limit to the value of human research, especially this research, when we fail to interpret it through the lens of lived experience. Their voices are essential. The perspective I can share is that of someone who has gradually moved away from the notion that quantitative data is the singular goal or even the best form of evidence. When it comes to veterans, who are mostly men, the realities for women are often concealed under aggregate numbers that convey the very different realities faced by men. For example, veterans as a whole experience very little decline in income when they leave the military, as was mentioned earlier, and they very quickly regain and exceed their pre-release income levels. But this is the story for men. Looking just at women veterans, we see a decline in income of almost 20% in their first year after release. Or consider that the proportion of military members in recent years who release for medical reasons is approaching 1/3. That's quite high, but the rate for women over the same period is considerably higher at 42%. Now, there are some trends that are comparable between women and men veterans. Both, as mentioned, have similarly high rates of PTSD, high rates of back problems. But though every phase of the military life course is different for them, we encounter key differences between the experiences of men and women. We know women don't stay in the military as long as men. We know they are more likely to suffer sexual trauma during service. We know that while they are just as likely to become officers, women release at lower ranks. We know that women are more likely to release in order to be a caregiver. We know that once they release, they are more likely to work part-time. We know they have more complex combinations of health conditions, and this contributes to longer benefit application processing times. We know they have a higher risk of dying by suicide than women of the same age in the population, but still a lower rate than veteran men, but the risk for women does not diminish with age as it does for men. These are trends that have been difficult to learn, difficult to measure over time. There's obviously more to learn, and we have a lot of positive momentum that I'll group into a few categories. First, the women veteran community is increasingly engaged across the department. VAC has established an Office of Women and LGBTQ2 Veterans. VAC has launched the Let's Talk Veterans engagement platform. VAC has dedicated funding to community-based organizations focused on women veterans through the Veteran and Family Wellbeing Fund. Second, there's a growing network of researchers in Canada looking specifically at topics of concern to women veterans. Several research interest groups and communities of practice have recently launched. There are new researchers entering the field of veteran well-being research and tackling challenging issues like women veteran homelessness. There are increasing international veteran research collaborations. Third, VAC is applying emerging best practices to respond to the needs identified through research and evidence. For example, VAC has established a dedicated team to process disability benefit applications from women. VAC is modernizing our table of disabilities with gender equity in decision-making as a core principle. This includes updating entitlement eligibility guidelines to reflect additional sex-specific conditions. VAC has promoted a trauma-informed philosophy across its frontline services and claims processing. VAC has adopted the principles of sex and gender equity in research, or SAGR, to ensure that sex and gender impacts are considered at every phase of research, from the study design to participant recruitment to data analysis and knowledge mobilization. And finally, there are new and better data sources supporting gender disaggregated analysis. The 2021 census was a major milestone in describing the veteran population. And starting in 2022, the new Canadian Veteran Health Survey measures veteran well-being in multiple domains across the entire veteran population in Canada. Mr. Chair, from what I have seen across the department, Veterans Affairs is genuinely looking to improve on every front when it comes to providing equitable services and programs. I look forward to the committee's report on this study and how it will improve our understanding of the needs and challenges and perspectives of women veterans. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Svensson. And I'd like to remind that if you have any your notes or any additional information to provide the committee, do not hesitate to do so to our clerk. It will be so appreciated. So maintenant allons à la.
We'll move on to the first round of questioning.
This is Kathy Wagenthal for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you both for being here this evening. I really appreciate this, and this is a good segue from what we have heard from the Ombudsman and some of the research going on there. And of course, she's an individual who has served very admirably, and we really appreciate her feedback as well. What I am beginning to hear, and we're just beginning this study, so I appreciate that as well. I'm hearing that really you're just on the cusp of beginning to do some things to ensure that you're giving focus specifically to women veterans. Would that be accurate?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Yes, that would be accurate. I would say if we back up 20 years, there was very little research on veteran well-being at all in Canada. And it was very difficult to collect data about the veteran population. And it, until recently, I would say it has remained difficult. And even in our targeted studies, it's still difficult to recruit individual veterans. But what has changed in the past few years really is our access to administrative data from veterans who are releasing from the armed forces. We have more and more data that's shared by Department of National Defense confidentially with Veterans Affairs so that we can paint a picture. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I just have a few questions here, and I want to make sure I get your responses. What I struggle with is the whole process of transitioning from the armed forces to Veterans Affairs. I've been on this committee for 8 years now, and quite honestly, this issue has been front and center for all 8 of those years. The struggles we're just beginning to realize. We're talking about women in the armed forces for over 20 years now, right? And yet we're just beginning to take a look at these things. What is the communication like in regard to what you need to hear about women's service in your relationship with D&D? When someone is transitioning, do you feel that the women have the same services available to them to make that transition, and should they be the same, or are we in a situation here where we're trying to fit 2 square scenarios into where one is a circle and one is a square? I won't say
Mr.
which one's
Chair.
the square.
Thank you for the question.
Yes.
I think we had that same question, and we commissioned a study, funded a study by Maya Eichler, who was mentioned earlier, Dr. Maya Eichler from Mount St. Vincent University, to conduct a longitudinal qualitative study of women veterans who were releasing from the armed forces, starting before they released and continuing after their release period. And perhaps I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Lisa Garland-Baird, for some additional information on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So this particular study was very interesting in its findings. Again, it was looking at a cohort of women members and veterans over the course of 2 years, and where they were interviewed at 3 different intervals. And of course, the purpose of that study was to understand what were the differences for women in terms of their military to civilian transition. And some of the main findings that came from that study, I think speak to the need to look between the lines when we look at smaller groups. In one of the cases, the findings demonstrated that women veterans later, as they released, they recognized that they had some health issues that they didn't identify when they first released from the military, which then they had wished that they could respond to.
Okay, can I just interrupt there? Because that same scenario applies to the men as well, that they tend to release and then it's much later on in time. So it's interesting. I think we really have to try to determine what is typical just for veteran versus what is specific to women. I understand that VAC has done some, I wouldn't say it's a study, but they're determining differences between the men and the women, and they have lumped the women who serve in with the wives and the widows and getting their stats and feedback from that. Is that the same scenario here, or are you dealing specifically with the women who serve as veterans? Who have served, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification I'd like to add in terms of, because that's a really good point that was made about the fact that similar findings for men and women as they release, and particularly for women, what women were talking about were things related to reproductive and sexual health that they did not potentially had access to screening to prior to release or was not part of their medical release. So there are some very specific pieces from that study that we can point to the differences. In respect to the 2022 VAC National Client Survey, it is true that that cohort does include survivors as well as women veterans. The challenge with that survey is because it is a small sample size. At this point in time, it's about 3,400 clients, everyone that receives services.
Can I just ask a brief question? I know I'm out of time, Chair. How many women veterans do you actually know where they are? How many are you able to access?
In 10 seconds, please.
We have a better administrative data, and that is how we pull our sample frame.
Thank you, Mrs. Morgenthau. And now I have to go to Mr. Charles Rogers for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. We knew this study was going to be an interesting one, and already it's turning into quite an interesting study. They'll be listening to some of the initial witnesses, and of course, Mr. Svensson, I want to focus on, I guess, the office. In 2019, VAC opened the Office of Women and LGBTQ2 veterans. So could you tell us more about exactly the purpose of that office, and what has the office of these groups done since their opening?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. The objective of that office is really to address some of these underlying challenges that are faced by women veterans who are coming to the department and those who aren't, ensuring that the access to service is equitable across the department. And so the office really has a very broad scope and they consult with areas and every function across the department at every level to ensure that when each area is administering their own responsibilities, that they are keeping in mind the needs, concerns of women and LGBTQ2 veterans who may otherwise be experiencing barriers to access or barriers to the programs and services.
So, could you speak a little bit about some of the feedback that the department received when they did the forum for women in the LGBTQ forum that was done, and what kind of a feedback that you got overall?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The first Women Veterans Forum was held in 2019. It was I was there. It was a wonderful experience and full of energy, and it was the first of its kind in Canada to discuss specific challenges women face in their lives after service. From my perspective, I was listening for the research opportunities and the research gaps that were raised, and there were many. In fact, I was stunned at how prominently research as a theme was raised by all of the stakeholders who were there. And some of the research opportunities that were raised there included infertility, menopause, mental health, social issues, homelessness, transition from military to civilian life, including the financial impacts, some of which we've already touched on, intersectionality and cultural differences among underrepresented veterans, in particular Indigenous, Francophone, LGBTQ2+ perspectives, and a number of other categories. So that feedback was all taken back to the department and carefully reviewed, and we looked for opportunities to embark on research where feasible in those areas.
From a previous witness, one statement that you made that struck me was she said, transitioning to civilian life, when you take off your uniform and not know who you are, that sort of resonated strongly with me. So is that a common kind of a feeling that you get from people when you do all these interviews about what are they thinking about their future and where are we going from here when I walk out the door kind of thing? Is that a common refrain heard from all veterans?
I think thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think the concept of maintaining a purpose in life is a theme, at least, that's common across men and women veterans. I would say that it's one of the more difficult aspects to cover in quantitative research, and this is why this is a reason, an argument for including more qualitative research to better understand the individual stories and experiences of veterans where the numbers don't tell the whole story. The analogy I like to use is that the data that we have is simply the mortar that binds together the stones of lived experience into a foundation of understanding. And quantitative and qualitative research need to validate each other and are both essential to supporting informed policies and impactful programs.
I'll ask you a question this way. What stigmas do you find are unique to female veterans that they have to actively work to overcome in order to be successful in post-service?
Well, thank you for the question. I'll turn the question over to Dr. Garland Baird.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Very quickly, one of the findings from the previous study that we discussed from Dr. Maya Eckler talked about women veterans experiencing age as an issue as they re-entered or tried to re-enter the workplace. So that was a concern, and they felt that not only did it contribute to deteriorating health, they saw that as a barrier to employment, and many women spoke about experiencing ageism as well as not being seen as a veteran because they did not fit by the employer. They did not fit the traditional vision of what they would think of a veteran would look like.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Et maintenant, nous allons passer la parole à Monsieur Luc Desilets.
Now we will hear from Member Luc Desilets. Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to our guests. Earlier this evening, Ms. Jardine said we needed more research, particularly comparative and GBA-type analyses, to see what the issues of concern to women veterans would be, specifically. I'm sure that you share her opinion, Mr. Svensson? Yes? Rather rhetorical question, but in any case, the experience that you have, the idea that we have to increase the collection of data on specifically lived experience of women, what would be the role of VAC to get this on the go?
I think there have been a few new opportunities that have been presented to Veterans Affairs and how we can engage with the women veteran community and subpopulations within that community. One of the key takeaways for me from the most recent Women Veterans Forum in February 2023, just last month, was the need for inclusion of underrepresented voices in research. And VAC has come a long way in broadening the available data to be able to disaggregate our analysis in many measures. But we want to push that closer to what we would call participatory research. And for this purpose, our research staff actually will be engaging with the veteran community in coming months to fill in that human narrative that isn't captured in our statistical data. And perhaps Dr. Garland Baird, if you wanted to add a comment.
Parfait. Merci. Elle a aussi fait allusion, Mme Jardine.
Thank you. Colonel Jardine also alluded to a meta-study of the experience of women veterans and the comparison between male veterans with the CAF and RCMP. There were 84 specific sources that were matched to complete this analysis. Well, women are less represented in the upper hierarchy. They suffer more from articular problems, etc. They have a higher rate of suicide, and the picture is quite somber. Now, according to your knowledge and your experience, are there any causes that can actually be identified for that particular excess of these symptoms with women? I don't know why there's a timeline here.
I would say we need to be careful when we're working with the kind of data that we have available. It's not data that supports easily establishing relationships between cause and effect. So while we can measure differences and determine that there are differences in prevalence of many different conditions, it's difficult to tie that back to specific experiences unless we have a full history of their military occupation. That's a piece of information that we don't have, or a set of information that we generally don't have access to when veterans come to VAC for services, or when we're talking to veterans or veterans are filling out questionnaires that provide data to VAC or to Statistics Canada. We don't have that full military career history.
Okay. Donc, vous ne regardez pas
So you don't necessarily identify underlying causes for the results.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The majority of our research does not try to establish causality of the conditions or the trends that we see.
OK. Est-ce que, par contre, je comprends, j'accepte votre mandat?
Okay. I realize that may not be part of your mandate. But when there is data that is interesting, significant, How good are the communications with national defense? Can you draw these things to their attention?
And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think we have a very strong relationship. As Colonel Jardine mentioned, there is a joint steering committee, and that's brings the two departments together in a very deliberate way so that we can solve problems that we encounter, including on the research front. And we're working with the Department of National Defense and their multiple research groups. Perhaps Dr. Garland Baird wants to say a little bit more about that. She's been involved in those discussions.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So some of the collaborations that we are embarking on with other researchers in the community to explore some of those pointed targeted areas that have been identified and how that becomes identified is through multiple collaborations with veterans groups, including women's veterans. And so we hope to build on those collaborations as we move forward.
Merci à vous deux.
Thank you to you both. Thank you, Mr. Desley, and thanks to our witnesses.
Is for Miss Rachel Blenny for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I thank the witnesses. So my first question through the Chair is there a VAC women's health research strategy? And if so, is it publicly available? How was it developed? Who is involved? Does it exist?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. We do have research priorities identified for women veterans that for us are shaping the direction that we're taking going forward with research. We're finding that there are many more opportunities and directions we can go now following the identification of veterans in Canada through the 2021 census, where before we had very limited scope of information that we could tap into. Now we're finding that we can expand the types of research that we can do, including data linkages with other federal administrative data sources from other departmental programs. Of course, that's in partnership with Statistics Canada. So we're building our relationship with Statistics Canada. And they have access to
sorry to interrupt. I really apologize. But I guess my main, is there a strategy? Like I hear that you're linking with other people, other departments, but is there a specific strategy that you point at it that you can have some measurable outcomes?
We do have a women veterans research plan that is focusing on specific areas such as aging and sex-specific cancers and occupational exposures and healthcare access and opioid use. We don't publish the specific initiatives that are coming up.
So is it public?
Sorry,
is it something that the committee could look at just to see sort of what the plan is?
We can certainly share our research priorities with the committee, yes.
Thank you. That would be helpful. So I know that the first Women Veteran Forum was held in PEI in 2019, about 4 years ago, and research was mentioned in the summary, I think 24 times. So obviously a central theme and a priority area. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about what has been done on health-specific issue research for women veterans since then, and a couple of things that I'm particularly very interested in is we know that women veterans who served in the Middle East and experienced burn pit exposures are now experiencing higher rates of breast cancer. So do we know if those rates of breast cancer are different from women who did not serve in the Middle East and experience that combat exposure? And then around that, do we know if veteran women receive higher rates of breast cancer compared to civilian women? I'm just wondering. And then the other part, because these are the issues I hear about the most, is about uterine prolapse or stress incontinence related to military duty. So has any research been done on this? And since this happened in 2019, sort of where is the direction of the department going in terms of researching these important issues specifically for women veterans?
Thank you for the question. So there were a few different pieces in there. I'll start with the breast cancer item. So all of the cancer prevalence or cancer incidence type studies require a large population set in order to have reportable results with any confidence. With the cohort of veterans who served in the Persian Gulf, for example, that's a fairly small number. It's only around 5,000 to start with. And then if you isolate that down to the women veterans who are part of that, that's a much smaller number, and it becomes very difficult to produce reliable or robust statistical estimates about cancer prevalence and comparisons against the population. So just with that caveat. But I will say we are now able, again, thanks to the census, to conduct a data linkage study, which we're just embarking on, that's looking at cancer prevalence among veterans, thanks to the existence of the Canadian Cancer Registry that has all primary cancer diagnoses since 1991 in Canada that we can link against all living veterans in Canada. So we now have, as of just the past few months, the data components that make that kind of analysis possible.
So, okay, I'm feeling a little frustrated. It's really apparent to me, not at you, but just at the fact that we obviously do not have a lot of data about women veterans, and this is very concerning to me. So I guess my next question is, how does this department in VAC meaningfully include the voices of women veterans in their research? And would, for example, a woman veteran advisory committee be helpful for research prioritization and development? Because I'm just concerned that the focus isn't there. Would it be wise to have women veterans actually be part of that advisory committee to research?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So the answer is we are eager to engage and to discuss our research plans, our research methods with women veterans in the community, whatever form that takes. I mentioned that there are, in my opening remarks, there are some new community level groups that are coming together, and they are providing input into the department's perception and perspectives on how we should engage in research. Some of those groups include the Women Veterans Research Engagement Network, the Canadian Military Women's Health Research Interest Group, which includes members or representation from VAC and D&D, and the medical community, at the Military Sexual Trauma Community of Practice. These groups...
Mr. Svensson, sorry to interrupt you. The time is up. So I have to give the floor to Mr. Thierry Delville for 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just love the way you say my name.
Thank you.
Anyway, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight and for your testimony. I know in the first hour of testimony, one of the things that we heard is that female veterans seem to have a hard time finding employment after service, and a lot of times it's part-time. So I'm just wondering, does VAC have a hiring target for all veterans? First of all, I guess be the question, and if so, what it is.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm not aware of that information, but we will provide a response to the committee.
Okay, and I guess a follow-up to that, if you could break it down for us, if there's a hiring target for females in the actual Veterans Affairs as well, if we could have a number on that for our study here, because I think it's quite important that if we're going to, we got to lead by example, quite frankly. I know, come from municipal world when it was volunteer firefighters, we made sure we said to everyone, because every other company wanted to, we had to make sure that we were doing the exact same thing. So I want to make sure that we follow suit, that we're hiring as many as we can, and hopefully and can hire more. Another thing that we heard in the first hour was a bit of a thing that I can't quite understand. It seemed entirely illogical to me, is that DND and VAC have different standards for determining what injuries are service-related and which ones are not. I would think that would be a pretty seamless transition from one to the other. So I just wonder if you could give us the idea or the thoughts behind that.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I don't have specific eligibility criteria or the knowledge to analyze the differences between how VAC and how D&D assess those. So we'll need to respond, provide a response back to the committee.
Okay, I'm just wondering, have you heard of that before? Because I was kind of, it perked my ears when I heard it earlier in the testimony here. I just thought it seemed quite strange to government, ministries. You think they would be succinct in that, how you're injured and how it would relate. I'm just wondering, do you not get lots of complaints about that?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I know that because we don't have a healthcare administration that's part of the department's mandate, the services that we provide are fundamentally different. During military service, the CAF Health Services provides care directly. So the types of services and interactions that they would be having with their serving members would be different than what we're dealing with now. That's because we're not having conversations with veterans as a healthcare provider. So I would imagine that those conversations would look different, but specifically the complaints that you're referring to, I'm not familiar with those.
Okay, and then I just a follow-up. I know we had a comment earlier from the ombudsperson about it, but since I've been on this committee, I've received lots of calls. You do, they look you up and they know you're on the committee and they want to, ask questions. But the one thing that's been consistent is the fact that, and I'm not saying that certainly the department is that way, but the perception is a lot of people seem to be afraid, seem to talk, don't want to talk about the issues that they have, and they're afraid. So I'm just wondering, why do you think they have that feeling?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I have heard that there are people who perhaps would be eligible for services from Veterans Affairs who don't come forward for a variety of different reasons. And one of the things that we want to look at in our qualitative research is determining what those barriers are, whether they're perceived barriers, whether they're real barriers, whether there's a different approach that we can take to change the culture of the services that we provide to make it more welcoming for women veterans in particular to come forward. I think we're actively looking at those kinds of changes. That's part of the reason why we have implemented a trauma-informed mandatory training across the department, so that across all of the frontline and veteran-facing services, so that if there are things that we're doing as a department that are keeping people away or perhaps creating a distance there, that we can recognize that, identify it, and find solutions.
So you've been working on that then, so that number will probably get a lot better, is what you're telling me?
Mr. Chair, I hope so.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so now, 5 minutes to Mr. Sean Casey. Sean Casey, the floor is yours.
I believe Mr. Sanson.
Okay,
sorry.
Let's go to Darrell Sanson for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, thank you. First, I'd like to say that I'm extremely happy that the committee has decided to dedicate this study to women and marginalized military men, women, and marginalized Canadians. I think this is so essential. I've been in this committee for 6 years, and I can say that I don't know how many times I've heard the challenges that women face in the military itself, and when they're out, of course, and the transition, how difficult it is, and in some areas, twice and 3 times more difficult. I'm really happy that we're able to dig deep in that area. 20 meetings is, I think, will allow us to drill down deeper, if I can say that. And I'm sure that the members of all parties around this table will focus on what's important, and that's to identify some of the challenges and try to find solutions or recommendation so that we can make life better for those that are serving and those that have served. I thank you both for your presentation and for some of the information that we've gathered. Last week I was in Quebec, and I was able to observe une pièce de théâtre, Monarch, par le...
a theater. And
hour was exactly what Colonel Jardine shared, which was the military is your life when you're in the military. And when you leave the military, you seem to have lost a part of your family, and you've lost your identity. So I guess I'd ask both of you to comment on that if you've seen through research, if you have any information on that piece to begin with. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I would start by saying that to date, the research that we've been able to conduct, especially when we're talking about services that are delivered by Veterans Affairs, we have a limited reach. The census counted 75,000 approximately women veterans in Canada, and we only serve a fraction of that. So there's a broad proportion of the women veteran population who, despite our best efforts, we really can't say that we understand very well. So it's important to us to be able to reach out to the community, to stakeholders, and get their voices. And perhaps I'll give Dr. Garland-Baird just a moment to talk about how we're going to do that.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So we are really excited to be engaging with veterans themselves and veterans groups in the community across all of Canada in the coming months. And we are looking at women veterans as well as equity deserving groups. So we are interested in understanding those lived experiences. So things like, how do women veterans experience issues around identity? Is that different than how men might experience that? We are also looking at, what it is that they feel are the supports that serve them the best, not just from Veterans Affairs Canada, but in their communities. And what does that look like? We aim to also identify not just the deficits, but the strengths, because we really believe that we can leverage various partnerships that VAC has with other federal departments, as VAC does not have a full mandate for all of the well-being for veterans, healthcare, for example, but we can work with our partners. But we can only do that by speaking directly to the veteran communities themselves and sincerely listening to what their experiences are, so that we can move forward with identifying where those gaps exist.
I agree with you fully. It's about partnership. So talk to me a bit about partnership. What partnerships do we have in this country? We have some great universities and great research. Is there some gathering of research around women in the military in the country and outside the country?
Thank you,
what
Mr.
are some of the best practices?
Dr. Bird, a quick, in 10 seconds, please, if you have something to
I would say that we have very strong relationships with academic institutions through the CIMVR, which is the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research.
Thank you so much. Maintenant, Monsieur.
I was going to give the floor to Mr. Desilets, so I'm sorry. The House of Commons is calling for votes.
Ask members of the committee. We have, let's say, 12 minutes left for the committee for this meeting. So I'd like to know if you want to go on till the end, and after that, going to vote, but I have to have unanimous consent for that. If not, I
I'm
have
happy
to
stay till
stop
the end.
right away.
Monsieur le Président, moi,
OK, allez-y. Monsieur Desilets?
Go ahead, Mr. Desilets. Well, I think we should complete, and then two times 2.5 minutes, and then we can go vote. Yes, that's what I would suggest. Okay?
Opportunity.
Yeah, no. No, let's me be clear. We are in the we are in the second round. So I have 2 minutes and a half for Mr. Desilets and Ms. Blenay, and 5 minutes for conservative and liberals. So, but now it's 2020. We have 10 minutes to go on with that. So we only have 10 minutes.
2.5, 2.5, and a 5, right?
Excuse me, you mean?
You've got 10 minutes, so that would mean 2.5, 2.5, and 5 over here, correct?
Well, we have to have.
Or we could have 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, and we'd have a shared with the conservative.
My understanding is we're going to follow the normal order. What's the normal order? That's what I was trying to understand. Yeah.
I agree. That's the normal order.
Okay, so
but okay, so I understand that you want to continue with the order till 8:30. Okay, so j'étais sur le point de démarrer. Alors, Monsieur.
Okay, so let's get going. Mr. Desilets, you got 2.5 minutes. Mr. Svensson, your team is composed of how many members? And what is your budget?
About a dozen researchers, and our budget is about, well, I think I'll give you I'll provide the accurate numbers because I don't have the exact number in front of me. So we'll come back to the committee with the actual budgets, but we have about a dozen researchers.
Pas de problème, vous serez gentil, merci.
Yes, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Do you think you could use a budget increase in order to, go above and beyond and get some outcomes? If we can't find cause and effect, it's very difficult to build a remedial plan, if you will. So should we extend your mandate, in other words?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. My function doesn't extend to departmental budgeting, so I can't comment on budget matters. I'm sorry.
OK, mais dans ce cas-là, trouvez-vous que
Very well. For the number of members on your team, is that adequate to satisfy the demand?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I think what is the most important factor for us in mobilizing our research capacity is really the extent to which we can work successfully with partners who are experts in many, many fields. So Dr. Garland Baird mentioned CIMVR, the Canadian Institute for Military Veteran Health Research. We also fund research that's through ATLAS, the ATLAS Institute for Veterans and their Families, and the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Veterans. And together with those organizations and many, many, many academic partners across the country, we can achieve a lot of things, and there are a lot of researchers who are willing to work with us. It's a matter of finding the right people and collaborating with them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Svensson. So now let's go to Ms. Blenay for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Chair. And my question to the witnesses is, how does VAC communicate its veteran health-related research findings back to women and to women veterans and to the civilian healthcare providers? I know that about 80% of veterans are not VAC clients. So I'm just curious about, how do you get this information out, and how do you get it out to the healthcare providers who work with them?
Thank you for the question. I think there are a variety of ways. Some of the services that VAC funds, for example, mental health care services, are complementary to services that are provided through provincial healthcare systems, and so it's easier for us to be connected with the care providers in those fields. So, for example, we administer a number of operational stress injury clinics across the country. Those clinics operate in the provinces under the provincial healthcare systems, but we have close relationships with those clinics, so it's easier for us to share and distribute best practices because we have those communication channels open. It's more challenging in some other aspects of care delivery, but that is one of the reasons why we established those two centers of excellence, the Center of Excellence on Mental Health, ATLAS, and the Center of Excellence on Chronic Pain for veterans, because those were very mental health and chronic pain.
Okay. I think I got it. I just have very short time. So I'm just wondering about how the support from the minister and other seniors officers work with the department, and if there's ever an opportunity when you're asking for more resources and you don't get it. Like, I'm just wondering how those two things work together, the senior officials, the minister's office, and the work that you do in terms of research.
Thank you for the question. I'm not sure I understand it completely, but what I can say is that we've experienced when good ideas have come by and we've made logical suggestions, that the ears have been open within our department to explore new areas for research or compelling areas for research. So that's not a constraint in my mind, if that answers your question.
Thank you, Ms. Bliney. And now let's go to Mr. Blake Richards for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I've got 3 quick questions. Maybe we can even leave a little time for one of my Liberal colleagues to have a little bit of an opportunity if we can get some through it quickly. First question I had, a little bit of a follow-up to Mr. Dowdall's question earlier. He had asked you about the differences between DND and VAC in terms of determining what's a service-related injury. And you were going to get back to him with some information. I'm going to ask you about something kind of related, and maybe you can either answer it now, or if you can't, you can maybe get back to us with this information as well. And that's regarding when we're talking about the assessment of injuries in particular. And what happens often is, the injury happens at some point during service. Later on, the effects of the injury start to take their toll. A veteran comes looking for assistance, and there seems to be a loss of the documentation somewhere along the way. And often it seems as though it's in the transition from D&D to VAC. And I wonder if you've done any work to try and determine what is causing that, and what suggestions you've been able to come up with to help prevent that from happening in the future, or to at least minimize it.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I'm not familiar with the specific protocols for information transfer between the departments, but we'll come back to the committee with that information.
Could, and if you can tell us what work's being done, if any, to try to ensure that documentation isn't being lost, so that veterans can make sure they get the help they need. That would be helpful. So we'll leave that with you to get back to us on. Another follow-up to one of the questions Mr. Dowdall had asked earlier. He asked you about the number of veterans. I think it was Mr. Dowdall. Someone had asked you about the number of veterans employed at Veterans Affairs. I wonder if I assume that you're probably going to have to get back to me with this one because you didn't have the number there. But do you know about the number of veterans employed in the federal public service more generally? Could you give us a number on that? And if not, could you provide it?
I don't have that specific information with me, but we can provide that if we have it available.
Okay, and another issue that I've heard a fair bit about is service dogs for veterans who are managing with PTSD. And it seems as though they're indicating that they seem to be unavailable to them through Veterans Affairs. Can you tell me if that's accurate? Does Veterans Affairs provide service dogs for those with PTSD or other mental illness injuries?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that there are some entitlements related to assistance dogs. I can't say exactly what conditions would entitle a veteran to that, so we can come back with that information as well.
Sure, if you could, please, because I know I'm hearing from veterans that they're saying it's not. And I also was curious about service standards for service dogs for other organizations that are providing them. I'm hearing about that, and that there's a real lack of service standards for those. Do you know if Veterans Affairs provides service standards for service dogs?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I know that Veterans Affairs prior to 2018 funded an effort to establish national standards for service dogs that ultimately the bodies that were funded did not successfully establish universal or
So there isn't any
national
then?
standards?
There is no service standards now then that came from it? Is that a yes or no?
Within Canada, I don't believe that there are national standards on service dogs.
So that's unfortunate, and I hope it's something that Veterans Affairs will get to work on. But thank you for your. And if there's any time left, I'd be happy to let my Liberal colleagues have anything that's left.
Yes, 4 minutes left. Mr. Darrell Sanson?
I guess, thank you. I'll go back to my question. I don't think you got a chance to answer it. I talked about the research across the world on women veterans as well as in Canada. So maybe you can take that few minutes to do so. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So relating to women veterans, there are a number of initiatives internationally. I mean, we have collaborations with particularly our closest allied countries. We have a working group on research that meets regularly and coordinates areas of mutual interest. And we have a number of working groups that are exploring areas of from including occupational exposures, and that's the one that I think is most relevant to this study, looking at links between specific occupations in the military and downstream health impacts. And we're looking at bringing in information from D&D that will help us to identify which occupations or which common occupations are associated with specific conditions. I think that's a critical link in our long-term research planning. In terms of what we're doing in Canada, I think the one big development that we haven't touched on today is the establishment of the Canadian Veteran Health Survey. In the past, we've had a health survey. It was called the Life After Service Studies Survey, which asked about a number of different domains of well-being, and that's where many of the findings came from that were quoted in the first hour. And that was very instrumental, and it was the best that we could do at the time, starting in 2010. That's when that survey began. But now that we've had the census in 2021, we are able, or Statistics Canada is able to survey all Canadian veterans. And so we have established, we've grown that survey into what we're calling the Canadian Veteran Health Survey. And that was administered first in 2022, right out of the gate after the census. And that will bring back information that we've never had before, coverage, especially for older veterans, broader coverage and more reliable estimates for smaller groups, such as women veterans and smaller subpopulations, including LGBTQ2 veterans, for example. And that will cover information on a number of different topics, including, oh, I apologize, I lost my notes here. Including smoking, cannabis use, opioid use, oral health, and maternal health, maternal experiences. Those are all new domains that we haven't been able to ask of veterans in the past.
Thank you so much, Mr. Svensson. Thank you, Mr. Sanson. Écoutez, c'est tout le temps que nous avons.
Well, I'm afraid our time has expired with this panel.
The committee, I would like to thank our witnesses for their inputs in that study. So from the Department of Veterans Affairs, we have Nathan Svensson, Director of Research by video conference, and Dr. Lisa Garland-Baird, Senior Researcher from video conference, by video conference. Et j'en profite aussi pour
And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the technical team, the interpreters, the analysts, our clerk, of course. And I know that there are many veterans that are probably listening to us on the web.
So I'd like to say welcome to those two veterans who are in the room to look at our meeting. So, sur ce, la rencontre est ajournée.
So I will declare